Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Irene Natividad, president of the Global Summit of Women, which is the 31-year-old business and economic forum for women. Normally, we would be meeting in some country and there'll be hundreds of us. The last one was in Basel, Switzerland, where we had 1,028 participants. And the next one, and now we can actually say there will be a next one, it'll be hosted in Thailand, in Bangkok, October 14th to 16th, and I hope to see some of you there. Until then, we are bringing the summit to you. And today, and since it's part of Women's History Month, I am delighted to present to you a very special program. We've always wanted women who are in charge, and so today, you're going to meet 3 of them. And this is truly amazing because right now, even before we started planning, there were only 10 women presidents globally. But as of this week, there are now 11. Tanzania now has its first woman president. There are only 14 women prime ministers globally. Only 14, and you will meet 2 of them today. And these are pathetic numbers when you consider that we represent half or more than half of the world. And when you also remember the stories that initially countries led by women did better in controlling the COVID virus. And right now, Taiwan, New Zealand, Iceland are back to normal. Again, countries headed by women. So clearly, we need even more. And right now, the W20, which is the women's arm of the G20, is pushing for more such positions to be held by women, because clearly having women in charge is a plus rather than a minus. So let me begin with Aruba, where the Prime Minister is Evelyn Wever-Kroes, and she came into power in 2017. She made history by being the first woman to hold this position. Prior to that, she was a member of parliament for about 8 years. And prior to that, she was a tax lawyer. In fact, she worked at the tax agency in her country and then headed it up as Director General. She is a lawyer by profession, and being Prime Minister also means that she's, and I have to read all of this, she's Minister of General Affairs, of Integrity, of Energy, Innovation, and Government Organization. So let me show you this video that tells you even more about her.
The Honorable Evelina Wever-Kroes is the current Prime Minister of Aruba and the first female to hold this position. Mrs. Wever-Kroes was sworn into office on 17 November 2017. She is a member of the People's Electoral Movement and has been the leader of the party since 2011. Mrs. Wever-Kroes, who is an attorney at law specializing in tax law, heads a coalition government which comprises members of 2 other political parties.
Aruba is part of the Dutch Kingdom, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, together with Curacao and St. Martin. Those are islands in the vicinity. Bonaire, Saba, and Statia are also close by, are part of the Netherlands.
Today, Aruba and Curacao both technically being self-governing countries, but still having partial influence under the Dutch government.
Aruba is a very small island in the Caribbean Sea. We have a population of 110,000, 70 square miles, and it's always sunny. We have good weather. But of course, there are other challenges.
Aruba has an economy that is highly tourism-driven. 80% of our GDP is directly or indirectly linked to tourism. So the COVID crisis hit us hard, not only on public health, but also socio-economically. We closed our borders for the first time in Aruban history, so we could address the spreading of the virus on the island and to create a safe environment for our tourists or visitors to come back.
Aruba's Recovery Master Plan is devised to propel smart, inclusive, and sustainable growth, which include climate-resilient practices and solutions, as these need to be embedded in how we build back better and stronger.
It's very important to keep up with the changes on innovation and digitalization. And that's where we found the Estonian model. We are working together with the e-Governance Academy of Estonia to be well equipped by 2030. Digitalize government services, more transparency in order to combat corruption, improving the quality of life of the people of Aruba.
Through an unwavering commitment and exponential leadership, women are an essential part in driving and thriving societies and businesses that increase prosperity, that increase the well-being of our communities, and that are able to boost an entire country's GDP.
Welcome, Prime Minister. I should mention that Aruba has 37% of parliament being female, and the average globally is 25%. So it's one of the best practices. So Prime Minister, what is the status right now of COVID in your island, where tourism is the key driver of the economy?
Well, good morning, Irene. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to be part of the summit again for the second time. It's truly an honor. Well, you know, Aruba, like many other nations, we were confronted with an acute socio-economic emergency. The COVID pandemic, it hit us hard. We had to prioritize at that moment the public health and the safety, like other nations did as well. It left us with no choice but to close the borders temporarily for several months. It's the first time in the history of our island that is tourism dependent that we had to close the borders. And of course, this resulted in a standstill of tourism activities and an economic contraction. Due to the, especially the dependence that we had on tourism, we were hit very, very hard, exponentially harder than countries in the region. We had a sudden unemployment and a retraction of the economy, yet we were able to reopen the borders safely in June, July of last year already, and we have taken some necessary measures to find a balance between keeping our population and visitors safe and restart the economic activity. One of the first steps actions that we took was an economic stimulus response. This required, of course, strong engagement and open dialogue with our partners, especially the Netherlands, like was mentioned in the introduction. And we had to embrace a new way of thinking. We have to apply a relentless focus on our economic response to maintain the jobs and create new jobs and to sustain the SMEs in Aruba. And aside from the immediate emergency response and a stimulus package and other temporary measures, we organized a nationally coordinated effort to develop an actionable plan to recover our economy. We named it Repositioning Our Sales Master Plan. And this is a 3-year plan that seeks economic growth that is smart, inclusive, sustainable, and it focuses on structural reforms so we can become a resilient country.
Thank you, Prime Minister. But I saw in one of the headlines that you had successfully negotiated a loan from the Dutch government. That could not have been easy. There was another headline in the video that said you had to do pay cuts. Was that part of the condition for the loan?
No, we have a long-standing relationship with the Netherlands, and Aruba has never been financed by the Netherlands. Although we're part of the kingdom, we were always financially self-sufficient. And in case we needed financing, we always went to the international market to get a financing. But when COVID hit, the financial market closed on us. We were no longer able to finance our needs on the international market. Then the only way forward was through the Netherlands. And my apologies. Before going to the Netherlands, we brought all the stakeholders together And we said, you know, before asking for help from the Netherlands, let's show what we can do. And then we asked everybody to show solidarity and to make the pay cuts. And everybody did it, the public sector, the semi-public sector, the private sector as well. And then when we already could show the sacrifices made by Aruba, it made the negotiations with the Netherlands easier.
Well, it's never easy to lead a country during a crisis like COVID. So has vaccination started yet in your country?
Yes. Actually, the 16th of February, we started vaccination. Currently, 12% of the population is vaccinated. And within a month, we will be at 30%, and then we will continue.
Wonderful. Good to hear that.
Yeah.
So you've been in this position for some time now. What are the skills that you felt you had to draw from to be able to lead during this crisis?
Well, to be very honest, this crisis confronts you with strengths that you didn't know you had. To be very honest, it took from me a lot of course, patience, but everything takes patience. But it was the communication that was key to the success of Aruba. We immediately started with communicating with the people of Aruba through press conferences every evening at 7. And it was every day, you know, and people would look at me and say, wow, she looks tired, she looks stressed, you know, she has more white hairs. But the message came across, and in the first part of the pandemic, especially the hardest part from March, because March 13th was the first case that we detected in Aruba, till June, July, when we reopened the borders, that was the first and the most difficult part. We had the lockdown, we had a shutdown, we had curfews, things that we never had in Aruba. But through communication and, you know, empathy. I think empathy is the most important thing, because you need to understand what people are feeling. There are people that are insecure, they're losing their jobs, and children cannot go to school. And if you just try to communicate like, you know, like military or just imposing, it will not, the message will not get there. So it was a lot of communication, talking to the people, being among the people is also to know what they're feeling. I think that was the clue. And I have to say, Aruba has had in history since the 40s, 1940. Aruba started striving for more autonomy within the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And that has made us different from the rest of the kingdom. And since 1940, it was realized in 1986 when we achieved our autonomous status. So we have to strive, we have to fight for it. And that love that we all have for Aruba, the unconditional love and well, I don't know how to express it, but for Aruba and what we have done to be autonomous, I think that has brought us together in this difficult time. We have confronted many challenges in the past, but this is a huge challenge, and we're confronting it, and we will surpass. We will prevail.
I think you just mentioned characteristics that the Prime Minister of New Zealand also emphasized: empathy, communication, being with your people, understanding that this is something that together is being suffered by the whole nation, and that actually does work, and also persistence. Now, you're the first, of course, Prime Minister ever who's female. Overall, why do you think there are so few of you, so few of those of you, even in this forum today?
You know, I think it's very different depending on the countries and what the countries have been through. I think that as women, we have made advancements and breaking glass ceilings all over the world and in history. However, there are still structural barriers that remain in place, and this inhibits women and girls from every background to perhaps achieve their maximum potential and opportunity. This pandemic has not helped us, Irene, to be very honest. This pandemic is making us face that the advancements that we have been making, that they are fragile. And it reflects that the challenges are enormous. And women all over the world are the most affected by the pandemic in terms of job loss, unpaid time off that they had to take care of the children due to closing of the schools, increasing domestic violence. They had to work from home to care for the family, and so on. So what we now must do is to make sure that everything that we have done in the past, that we, our generation, and the generations before us, have done in the past to strengthen the position of women in leadership, that we do not lose all the efforts that were done. So we must be very careful that this temporary crisis, because this crisis is temporary, that it will not lead to structural regression when it comes to gender equality. Because
well, thank you. Yes, thank you for reminding us of what's called the She Session, the huge loss of women in the economies as stakeholders in the economies globally. In fact, I was saying to somebody, it's like each country has to regrow their economies with one hand tied behind their backs, because one big chunk of workers, women who represented 37% of the global GDP pre-pandemic, are not there. And it is likely that a lot of the job losses may be permanent. So thank you for reminding us that we have to confront that each country must confront that loss and do something about it. So I hope you're not the last woman prime minister. I hope you're working towards having more. So what do you think? What would you like people to remember in terms of your work when you're finished with your tenure as prime minister? What do you want to leave behind that you feel was a true achievement?
Well, first of all, I would like for the people in Aruba, especially the girls and the boys, the youth, to be aware that you can achieve anything that you set your mind to. And there are no boundaries as long as you work hard for it and you do it on the path of integrity. I would like to see more women in the political arena and taking a seat at this important table. Women often list as their preferences a private sector career or family or personal life obstacles to enter into politics. And I hope that me myself, when I entered into politics, I had three relatively small children, but I did it as well. I left my career as a lawyer behind to do it. So I hope to inspire more women, because I think that women bring other characteristics to the political arena at the table. And I'm sure that the pandemic has shown that when you have women at the table, leading especially, but if you have more women at the table, then you can counter the panic and uncertainty that comes with a pandemic. Of course, we all have a plan. If it's a pandemic on health or economy, there are plans. Everybody can help you with that. But I'm convinced that women bring more to the table in order to get people behind the plan, to get the community and to let them feel at ease and confident that this too shall pass and that we will prevail. I hope that when I leave this office, that is the legacy that I leave behind here in Aruba, that women can do anything that they want, and that little girls, especially at this moment, watching and following everything that's happening, that this inspires them to be the best that they can be.
Well, that's terrific. If you had the opportunity for a do-over, is there anything in your career that you would do over?
I don't think I would do anything different than it's being done at this moment. I'm a person that once I make a decision, I stand behind it and I make it work.
And you have, and you will continue to do so. Thank you, Prime Minister, for joining us today. We hope for continued success in Aruba. And I'd love to visit one time. I've never been there.
You all should. The summit should come to Aruba.
Yes. vaccinations first, but thankfully you said 30% in about a month. So I think that's terrific. So let's now move on to Namibia. It's my pleasure now to introduce the Prime Minister there, Sarah Kugongwelba Madila. A little bit complicated, but it's beautifully sounding name. She came into power in 2015, and she's a long-term public servant because before that, she was Minister of Finance for 12 years, from 2003 to 2015. And during that time, she had to deal with the national debt, which was a lot, and successfully move them out to a surplus economy, which is quite a feat. She, as you will see in the video that I will show you shortly, she had to go into exile at some point in her life to Sierra Leone, where she finished her high school and then moved on to the United States, where she got her degree from Lincoln University in economics. She came back to her country in 2005 and worked initially in the president's office, specifically in the National Planning Commission. And then later on, she led that commission as Director General. She is considered a highly respected leader in her country. So let me show you some more about her.
Prime Minister Sarah Madila is one of Namibia's youngest politicians who is admired by young and old in the country.
Right from the beginning, while we were in refugee camps, we never just focused on fighting to bring about independence. They also paid attention to preparing us to govern the country when we are free. And they sent all of us to school, giving us equal opportunities.
Eventually ended up at Lincoln University in the United States of America, where she graduated in economics.
I never really grew up thinking that women cannot become leaders. It was also inspiring just to have men that were progressive-minded, allowing us opportunities to serve in political leadership positions.
As the country's long-serving finance minister, she led Namibia to its first budget surplus.
So the world has responded positively. What do you think is counting in your favor?
Well, we are very happy that the global markets have received us very well.
And President-elect Dr. Hage Geingob on Wednesday appointed long-serving Finance Minister Sarah Kugongwelba Madila as the country's first female Prime Minister.
We should make sure that we empower the women, we inspire the women, we change the mindset of the Namibian public, including those of men, to actually embrace women as equal partners with equal potential to develop Namibia. Studies have found that if better use were made of the women of the world, economic growth would increase in all countries, the number of people living in poverty would decline, business performance and innovation would be enhanced, the cost effectiveness of healthcare and social programs would be raised, and environmental damage from unsustainable activities would decrease.
Namibia's leaders have pushed an unusual zebra system to make sure women are represented at the highest levels. The idea is simple but controversial. In any ministry led by a man, his deputy would be a woman. In any department led by a woman, her deputy would be a man. Right now, women in Namibia hold 40% of seats in Namibia's parliament.
We received the 2017 Gender is My Agenda Campaign Award in recognition of the progress that the country has made in promoting the representation of women in key decision-making positions.
Welcome, Prime Minister. Good to see you again. I should mention to people that it's actually 44% of Parliament in Namibia is now female, and 39% of the cabinet is female. So, Prime Minister, Who came up with the idea of a zebra approach to leadership, to political leadership in your country?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Moderator and President of the International Summit for Women. That idea actually came from the founding president of our republic, who was also president of our political party that has been governing the country since independence, and was embraced by successive presidents after him, the second president and the current president. And that zebra style of listing is only applicable in the ruling party. And that is the reason why, although the ruling party has 65% of the seats in parliament, the representation of women is lower, because this policy is not practiced in other political parties that are represented in parliament. But we do have a threshold for women representation at the local authorities level, which is set at 30%. Unfortunately for the regional councils, it has been difficult to have that because it's first past the post. You have only one person representing a constituency. And therefore, in the second chamber of parliament, which is the National Council, made up of representatives from the regions, the gender representation there is not very good.
Well, thank you for that. But still, compared to the rest of the world, Namibia's numbers look very good. My question to you initially is, of course, Namibia too is dealing with COVID. How do things stand? Where do things stand right now in terms of mitigation of this virus and vaccinations?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we too are a small open economy where tourism plays a very significant role, and we import much of what we consume and actually export much of what we produce. And with the restrictions impacting on the movement of goods, we were impacted in terms of bringing things into the country, some of which were necessary, but we also had to close down our borders in order to mitigate against the spread of the virus. And given the fact that this is a leading sector in terms of job creation, that heavily impacted on employment situation in the country. And we already had high unemployment levels. So we had a lot of retrenchments in this sector. The economy went into a recession, and because some expenses could not be postponed, this resulted in escalation of debt. Deficit went to above 10% of GDP, which we have never had before, and debt approached 70% of GDP from around 50%. So Namibia was significantly impacted. But because of high levels of poverty and unemployment, we were forced to maintain our social safety nets and roll it out further by introducing what we called an emergency income grants to assist those citizens that lost their employments, those whose industries were shut down as part of the lockdown, to incentivize industries to limit at least retrenchments by co-financing the cost for maintaining employment for their employees, and also by assisting those whose remunerations were reduced to cope by giving them an additional subsidy. These are some of the interventions we made. And we also thought that maybe we can optimize the opportunities for employment that came with the COVID by assisting SMEs to manufacture sanitizers and masks, for example.
That's terrific, creating new jobs during this horrible crisis. So have borders been reopened so you can do trade, or is that still sort of...
Yes, borders have since been reopened. We reopened them sometimes last year after we have organized ourselves and we were in a position to make sure that people that came in could be quarantined or could be managed in terms of where they go so that we can limit infections, so that we are seeing now the recovery of the economy. But this recovery is very, very marginal, and we believe that it's going to take us quite some time to get to where we were before. And there is going to be a significant impact in terms of government's ability to continue with some of the important and programs that we thought were necessary for empowering the majority of the African population, the indigenous communities in the country that were previously disadvantaged during the colonial period and were being targeted by government with support programs in order to bring them on board the economy and to provide them with education so that they are able to have a better future in terms of jobs.
So growth overall is, in terms of the projects that you wanted to have in place, has been curtailed, if you will. So do you think that these stimulus payments that have been given out by the government, has it been working, do you think?
Yes, we believe that it assisted many households to actually just have a meal. Many of them didn't really know where the next meal was going to come from. But because they had to spend this money practically just to eat and not to engage in economic activities, it has not had a lasting impact on the economy. So we are expecting the economy to recover only marginally, maybe by about 2% after it decreased by more than 7% the last year. And we expect that in a year after that, it may grow by only 3% and then 4% after that, which for a country like Namibia with high levels of unemployment is grossly inadequate to really make an impact on unemployment and poverty.
What do you feel has been your toughest decision to make so far during this transitional time?
Yeah, the toughest decisions that we have had to make is to shut down the country and to shut down the industries. It was very difficult in the beginning to convince the population, but as time went on, they started to understand. Unfortunately, when communities started to embrace the need for us to lock down the economy, it was only after we started to experience fatalities. People started dying from COVID. Then people started to realize that this thing is real. Initially, it was a challenge to get people to actually even embrace the COVID protocol, to say, wear your mask, keep a safe distance, do not open bars or something like that. It was a challenge. So that was one of the most difficult decisions that we have had to take. Another decision that was difficult that we have had to take was to recognize the impact on the economy and on the revenue of the government, and therefore the need to cut down on some of the expenditures that are very, very critical. It came to a point where we had to stall projects that were running, or we had to stop projects that we had committed to commissioning, important projects such as, for example, construction of schools and clinics and clean water, in a situation where people were living in overcrowded areas, informal settlements without water, exceeding the ratios in terms of students to teachers. It was a very difficult decision to make. But we believe that by curbing the spread of the virus and the negative impact, especially in terms of human lives lost and also on the economy, we have done well, and we have a basis now to promote the recovery of the economy.
Those are tough decisions, and there may have been sleepless nights for you. So,
yes, indeed.
So where did you draw your strength? What skills do you feel you had to display or to use in order to be effective during this time? And still, I mean, it hasn't, disappeared, this virus.
Yes, I think we had to rely on the resilience that enabled us to gain independence. Namibia really had to overcome tough challenges for us to become independent. We had to wage a brutal and bloody war through which many lives were lost. And many civilian communities also suffered, especially those that lived along the areas where the wars were fought. And many of us who went into exile at a very early age, we also had to experience very difficult situations. So we have to recall those times and summon the same courage and resilience and determination to say, just as it was difficult for us to get to where we are, it will be difficult for us to navigate this, but we will make it if we just keep the faith and we are resilient. And so it happened.
I was talking about you as opposed to the character of the nation. What have
Okay.
you had to draw from in terms of your inner strength in order to run the country during this time?
Yes. Okay. For me, myself, I must say that I have gone through a difficult period at the Ministry of Finance. You talked about when we have had to reduce the debt from somewhere near 40% of GDP, maybe I think about 35% of GDP, to a budget surplus situation that we were able to maintain for 3 years. It was also under very difficult social and economic situation prevailing in the country. So I told myself when we first started at the Ministry of Finance and we said these are the targets we have set, many people were skeptical. They thought that was unattainable. And I told myself, just as I was able to push that with the support of my colleagues, as a Prime Minister coordinating the National Emergency Committee, I summoned the same courage. And I have to give credit to my colleagues who actually rallied behind me and gave me the support, especially in the initial 3 months or so, when things were very, very difficult. But that is where we drew our strength. But I also drew, I think, the strength from the fact that I knew that we are a small, very vulnerable economy. And we all understood that if we do not do what needed to be done, what was needed to be done, the consequences may be too dire for us to deal with. We are a population of only 2-point-something million. In the capital city, we have up to 60% of the population living in informal settlements without water in overcrowded conditions. And we knew that if we did not push through these initiatives that we have adopted, we were going to have a catastrophe here, worse than what has been reported in some of the countries. I think it was more the fear of what can be if you don't really do what we are supposed to do than anything else.
Okay. Namibia seems to have found a formula to increase women's representation in government. What do you think countries should do? Because there's so few of you all over the world. What can be done going forward to increase the number of women in charge of nations?
Well, I believe that we should not shy away from prescribing inclusion thresholds, gender inclusion thresholds in the laws. For us, we started with the party. Charity starts at home, and then I think at local level we started at national level, but at national level we started at party. So I think we should not shy away from that. We would have to put that in the law. But then we should also proceed with the advocacy. And the advocacy should not only aim at making men to change the way they see women. It should also aim to make women have self-confidence, to realize that they have it in them to become what their male counterparts have become, and more. Because that is very, very important. And we should also be prepared to invest in the girl child, to make sure that women have equal opportunities to complete schools and get qualifications. And we have to deal with teenage pregnancies, for example, in communities where some communities are so religious that they want that a kid that gets pregnant should just be expelled from school. But we are saying that a kid that gets pregnant should be assisted to come back from school, in addition to being educated to avoid getting pregnant in the first instance. And we should also have dedicated initiatives to assist women who would want to venture into business to succeed, because women's representation should be promoted in all spheres of life. If young girls are seeing successful women in different areas of life, then they would also pick up the courage to become leaders in their own area of interest.
Well, Madam Prime Minister, I don't have to ask you what you want your legacy to be, because I think it is all of that. I too believe in quotas. You call them thresholds, because if we don't have those instruments to force, women's integration into government, it's not going to happen. So thank you so much for being part of this forum. And I admire your strength and leadership as well. So we'll now move to another part of the world, to Europe, to Kosovo. where the first woman president is Atifete Yayaga. And she came into power in 2011 and was named president until 2016. She had an unusual route to leadership. She is a lawyer as well by profession, but she decided that she wanted to work in national security. And so she was in the police force and became Deputy Director General of Kosovo's police before becoming Prime Minister. It's an unusual route, but in her country, security is a very, very important issue. And there was an anti-corruption agency, and they cited President Yayaga and her cabinet as the best example of transparency and accountability. And I think that is a great way to show you a video that tells you some more about her.
Ms. Atifete Yayaga was sworn in as Kosovo's first female head of state after the parliament elected her unanimously.
When Kosovo, a region with 95% Albanian Muslim, tried for independence in 1999, Serbia sent in troops and began a campaign of ethnic cleansing.
For many countries in Europe started to celebrate the democracy. For us in the Balkans, a new, dark and bloody period was about to start.
As Serbian forces retook territory from the KLA, thousands of Kosovo Albanians fled their homes.
Living through this injustice, I have decided to join the law. And immediately after the end of the war, back in 2000, I started to work for the United Nations office in Kosovo. What do you say when you are asked to be the president of the country? The role that very few women in the world have held. Unimaginable role for women in a very patriarchal society. I was used at throwing punches at the glass ceilings and cracking it. But this was the opportunity to crack it all together. I'm a strong believer that the quota is a very good system, and adding more chairs for women, for youth, for marginalized group, and for everyone that has been for far too long left outside of the decision-making process. Their bodies were turned into the battlefield. And so that's why I made one of my priority things within my presidency. First of all, to regulate their legal status so they could be considered as the civilian victims of the war. Second, the access to the justice and tackling this culture of the impunity, which unfortunately, since the end of the war, we do not have not a single perpetrator that has been brought in front of justice. We need your voices. We need our voices. And only if we stick together, if we work together, no matter where we are, no matter which part of the globe, we will be able to succeed.
Well, President Yayaga, it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
You don't have to deal with the current health crisis, but what is the situation from your perspective right now in terms of Kosovo's ability to deal with this pandemic?
My friend Irene, as both of the, first of all, thank you very much. And it's really a pleasure to be with you today, to be also with two very powerful ladies, such as Prime Minister of Namibia and the Prime Minister of Aruba, and listening from them from daily basis how they are managing the situation with the COVID-19. Actually, Kosovo has not been spared like many other countries in the world from this global pandemic. And we have the very first cases back in end of the February, beginning of March in the last year. And immediately the country and our government has introduced this national emergency plan in place in order, which was introduced with the isolation of the certain cities, certain of municipalities which have been introduced with the first cases of the COVID-19. And later on, the first 2 months, we were in a type of the full lockdown of the entire country because I think this, the whole situation of the COVID-19 was something new for all of the leaders around the world, and which all of us has to be were able to learn as we were moving and managing the situation. And so this has affected our country in many of the fronts, and I think similar like the entire world, Kosovo was also affected. The social fabric has been also touched because of people have lost their jobs, their mental welfare has also been affected due to the isolation. We have yet not received the vaccine because for within a year we have held about 2 processes of the elections, and we are just finished with the creation of the new government yesterday, and this process regarding the vaccine has been negotiated for a couple months in the row, and we are believing by the coming weeks time we will be receiving the first contingents of the vaccine. And but in general, the population of Kosovo is very young. About 60% of the population are under the age of the 30, which is in a way it is making much easier, especially with the spread of the virus. But nonetheless, some of our medical staff has been vaccinated in our neighboring country of Albania, which is in a kind contribution by our neighboring country of Albania and their government. However, the groups that have suffered the mostly by the pandemic are the marginalized groups and women, which were mentioned by both of the prime ministers here. We have had an increase of the cases, which something which has concerned to me personally, which I also have done a lot of projects with the Yahaga Foundation that you have mentioned earlier. We have seen the increase of the cases of the domestic violence reports, and the mental state of the small community has been affected gradually because Kosovo is a country, is very small country, has a very small number of the population, but a very multi-ethnic society, which is also has affected other groups of the community group health. This is why organization and our government have been working closely with all of the groups which have been affected during the time of the pandemic, and during this last year, 2 of the plans, the emergency plans, particularly including the economic recovery plan by the government, has been introduced. One which was introduced last September of last year, and another one that has been introduced beginning of this year, and which has a particular focus and has a gender element on that, how to deal with this recovery packages, which we have seen mainly by the countries and the governments which are mainly led by the women, that has shown one of the best examples of how to manage the situations.
Of course, that's sort of a given at this point. You came into power coming from a different crisis, a war that damaged your country enormously. And there too, you were dealing with economic recovery as well as sort of the mental state of a whole nation. And you had focused on recovering the health of the women, the physical health, especially of those women who were raped during that war. So tell me a little bit about what you had to do during that period. What did that mean when so many of the women were damaged in more ways than one?
Yeah. Irene, as Hugh already introduced in the video, 22 years ago, we have inherited the country which has been totally destroyed. It's left behind over tens and thousands of people who have been killed and massacred. An estimated number of 20,000 women and men raped during the wartime, where the rape has been used as a tool of war. And still, till today's date, no matter that we're 20 years after the end of the war, we have missing about 1,600 people missing in different massive graves, within the territory of Kosovo and the territory of Serbia. And during this pandemic, I believe that each one of us had the chance to look back on past years and reflect on the present. This was a case for myself as well, since I could relate to the difficult task that the current leaders had, namely leading nature during the crisis. And looking back 10 years ago feels like eternity. Nonetheless, I have fresh memories from the times I was elected as the president. My country was going through a political crisis in 2011, during which the political sphere was highly polarized and segregated. The country needed a leader of state that could serve as the unifying figure without protecting the interest of one political party, but only the overall interest of the state and its people in general. My professional preparation, along with the history of the zero corruptive affairs and highly integrity, made me a perfect fit for the position as the head of state. I was chosen to fix the problems that all my predecessors had created, and they were all men. This is also known as the glass cliff, my dear. This notion describes the idea that when a company is in a crisis, they put a female to lead in order to save it. To answer to your question, it takes a lot of things to lead a country during a crisis, after which I will highlight some of the values that, out of also my personal experience, that I think that are most important based on what I have gone through. The core value it takes is the integrity that I have executed in all of my work. There is a saying in my country that times of crisis and the times of achieve great things because the situation is making occurrences happening in the dust, and you can grab more by being unstopped by the rest. It takes a high moral and ethical principles and the true honesty to have your personality intact during such a trying time. And however, when the dust all settles and the vision is clear, you will not have to carry that burden of having hurt or benefited from the vulnerable when you go at the end of the day to go home to rest or to sleep. And the next, it also takes the empathy. Always care and put yourself in the position of the people that you lead. How would a decision affect your life, first of all, as a mother, as a widow, as a veteran, as an orphan, as a survivor of the domestic violence, as a father living in absolute poverty? Because I have gone through all of this. And take decision as you were the beneficiary, as a stakeholder, or as of the agreement, decision, policy that you are about to unfold or you are about to assign. My last point, my dear, is that it takes a tolerance and openness to receive advice and proposals from experts of the field. We leaders, and as women, as leaders, we actually, in general, as leaders, we may sometimes believe that we know everything, but the truth is that we don't. It takes to be opened to the professionals in the field in order to receive advice on how to manage the crisis from the experts in the field in order to lead to the certain purpose, and especially to lead the country like we are seeing in this situation of the crisis. So my main policy was that I extend the table of the decision and I added more chairs to everyone that has been left aside for far too long: women, marginalized groups, and the minorities.
Well, I think I've been hearing from other women heads of state saying the same thing, that they tend to bring in more people at the table and do tend to listen to experts. I think it's more men that tend to think that they're the only ones who know all the answers. I was going to ask you, any personal sacrifices that you had to make in order to do what you had to do?
I think all of my colleagues here, and especially both of the Prime Minister, would share my opinion on that, the sacrifice is every step ahead that we are doing, no matter what we do it, on every decision, on every step is the type of the sacrifice that we make it as the women. And because we are being always judged not by the way that we take the certain things, not by the way that we take the certain decision, but mostly by the way that we are being seen. And most of the criticism comes not because of our way that we lead or the way that we take the decision, but by the way that we look and we appear. And so itself, everything, it has been a sacrifice. And so for me personally, Irene, it was quite of the change for me to change from the background that I had and the excellent career that I had in front of me, which was also the breaking of many of the taboos for the mentality of our country and our people, because no matter that Kosovo is almost in the heart of the Europe, and our country and the most of the countries in the southeastern part of the Europe are very male-dominated society, are very masculine society, where there is always the idea that the men are here to lead and the women to follow. And with my decision to join immediately after the end of the war to the field of the security was kind of the change, and was in a way kind of like breaking or putting the first cracks into the glass ceiling, that the women had no role in this organization, and only if they had in certain of the administrative positions. And my purpose that time was to join to this organization for two reasons. One, not only to the break of the taboo for the women to have their role within this organization, but most importantly, to break into the perception of the people that whenever they've seen the uniform in the streets, what they've seen there, they've seen a beating, they have seen the torturing, they've seen the killing and the prosecution, but not the person which is there to serve to you, and the one which is there to protect your life and to protect your property. And so I was moving throughout my career, and I mentioned earlier that 10 years ago my country was going through a deep political crisis, and at that time until now I do not belong to any of the political party. I was independent. I remained in my independence throughout my mandate as the president. And my sacrifice was that I had to leave the career the way that I had in order to prove the role of the women, where when I took over the office, we had the women representation only based on quota which was the legal and constitutional requirement of quota, about 30%, which was introduced about 8 years before I assumed the office as the president. I was very pleased to see that only 4 years after my election as the president, about 50% of the women into the politics were chosen based on their competences and based in their performance and outside of the quota, which is a big step forward. And now 10 years after, in the last election, we have about 44% of the women represented into the parliament, which is the highest percentage in Kosovo and the region of the southeastern part of the Europe.
Well, so it's a high percentage.
Yeah. So no matter what kind of the personal sacrifice that we make it, because in certain times, all of us have to make a certain sacrifice in order to unfold the base or the platform for the other women to follow.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, President Yayaga. You are indeed a role model not only for Kosovo, but also for the rest of the world. And your foundation continues the work that you have wanted to do to uplift the women in Kosovo and in other countries. So with that, let me thank our heads of state who have decided to participate today. But I do want to introduce to you the current chair of the W20. This is the women's arm of the G20. And our leader this year is Linda Laura Sabatini from Italy, because Italy has the presidency of the W20. So I will give her the last word. So welcome, Linda Laura.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, I am very, very honored to speak after this fantastic and powerful women. It was really fascinating to listen to women who are playing such an important role in their country. Women are the future of leadership with their sense of communities, team, inclusiveness, care of relationships, determination. Statistics are clear. Women's increased engagement in public decision-making roles, but we are far from equality, and the process is very slow. At the current rate of progress, gender equality will not be reached among heads of governments until 2150, another 130 years. Women hold about 21% of ministerial positions globally. Only 3 countries have 50% or more women in parliament, and 22 countries are headed by a woman. This occurs despite their proven abilities as leaders and agents of change and their right to participate equally in democratic governance. Women persist and continue to prove that when they lead, they bring transformative changes to entire communities and the world at large. This is a she session. This is a care crisis. We know it. We need women leaders. They know what is better to do. Quantity creates quality. I think we can change the world. We can improve the world, but be careful. If women don't increase their presence in decision-making places, the situation of our countries, and especially of our democracies, will worsen. We can win. We are strong to win, but we must fight united, civil society, women of governments, and men who believe in gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you, and goodbye to everyone who joined us today. We will be able to see the rest of this program again. We have 57 countries represented in this airing alone, and look forward to the rest of you who may not have been able to join today to come and hear from these leaders. Thank you very much.